Well, I loved Linda's last question. I think that was awesome to see that these are questions that we need answers for, and it's shocking today in the public life of our country that we don't have better thought through ideas and proposals to deal with something that is affecting every single family in America, and that literally is a national security issue on every front. I mean, the thing that we always hear about America is that we have such great human capital. But what makes that human capital so great? It's our mental capital. I mean, it's just shocking in this day and age that we don't have the kinds of dollars pouring in to the kind of think tanks in Washington, D.C. that we see for other issues, that we don't have those dollars pouring in to fund future Linda Raines conferences. I mean, then we'd know that we actually had our priorities right, Linda. We'd know that this country cared about what you're doing here and what this conference is all about. I mean, bringing innovative providers and thinkers and investors. I mean, who would think? Who would think that you'd actually put together the kind of thoughtful presentations that you've had here today and focus it around something that all of us could benefit from as a nation, individually and in our families and as a nation? I mean, it really does tell you something that, when the gentleman got up and said, I'm a low-profit provider, he might as well have been speaking for everyone in the mental health field. Because, so I had the honor of authoring the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. And I always tell folks that they kind of got me by default because it didn't seem like there were a lot of politicians fighting over the dubious distinction of being the author of a bill that had both mental health in it and addiction. Because then, this was the double jeopardy. And then the last thing they wanted was a reporter asking him, well, do they have a mental health issue or addiction issue, or does their family? So, of course, politicians would have two answers. Yes, in which case there'd be 50 more questions on what medications you're on, where you've been to treatment, and so forth. Or no, in which case every reporter would know that they were lying. So this was not an issue that politicians were rushing in to be the champion of. And I was blessed because I had Bill Emmett, who's head of the Kennedy Forum, and was NAMI chapter president in Rhode Island, and got me to be the co-sponsor of a state law in Rhode Island for parity. And when I got to Congress, I just thought, well, I'll at least sign on to everything that I signed on into Rhode Island. I got to Washington, and I was surprised when I said to the clerk, can I hopefully make it in the top half of the Congress? Because there's 435 members of Congress. I said, maybe I can make it in the top 100, and I'll go home to my mental health community and tell them I made it in the top 100. Because I was used to, as a state rep, rushing to the clerk's desk if it was a really popular bill, so my name could be like way up there on the list of co-sponsors. You can imagine my surprise when the clerk came back and said, well, Congressman Kennedy, if you want to sponsor the bill, it's all yours. So it really is a sign of the troubling fact of our stigma in this country that I got to be the champion of a bill that is such an important bill, but which, frankly, people still have a hard time wrapping their heads around and understanding how critical it is to our nation's health overall. So I like to first address this as both mental illness and mental health. Because obviously in our movement we get the two kind of mixed together. No one kind of knows what we're talking about. So the parity law is to provide equal coverage for those with mental illness. Okay, that's, an illness needs treatment like every other illness. And whether you're inpatient in-network or outpatient in-network, or inpatient out-of-network or outpatient out-of-network, or you need pharmacy ER benefits, you must receive under the law the same level of care, primary, secondary, tertiary levels of care, that you would receive if you were getting similar treatment for cancer, cardiovascular disease, or diabetes. That's what the law says. And so, of course, we really have a new job to do, and that's get the law actually implemented so that it's more than just on paper, it's actually in practice. And I love what you all have done in Maryland, what my good friend Henry Harbin has always done in pushing for major oversight and actually determining whether patients are being discriminated against, which of course we all know. Yes, yes, yes. But what we need to do is come up with those harder evidence that will allow us to really enforce the law. And that means that we got to find out how the insurance companies make utilization management decisions. That sticky wicket of issues as to how do they limit care without telling you they're limiting care. And we eliminated all the very obvious barriers, higher co-pays, deductibles, premiums, lower lifetime caps. But obviously, we really haven't gotten to the heart of this, which is in this kind of insidious medical management practices where the quote-unquote behavioral health patient is not being treated the same as the cancer patient would be treated, or the cardiovascular disease patient or the diabetic would be treated. So, we can talk all about these great ideas, but what I'm here to say is, we can have the most ideal mental health system in the world, but if there's no money, it doesn't work. So we got to start upstream, and while we're coming up with all these brilliant ideas and opining the fact that payers are going to recognize that this is a great value because they're going to show that this technology is going to help improve the optimal outcomes of a patient with comorbidity, blah, 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 right? At the end of the day, what we need to know is, do they have someone breathing down their back and they feel a little liability? Because last time I checked, what makes Washington move, what makes the world go round, is liability and the fear of liability. That's why they hire all those lobbyists in Washington, D.C. to CYA, okay? Cover your ass. That's what it's about. And now insurance companies don't have to worry about covering their ass because they don't have to worry about covering their tracks because there aren't any tracks to cover because no one is demanding that we get that data that will determine whether they are applying these standards in the like way across mental health, medical, and surgical, just as we require under the law. So what we've done at the Kennedy Forum is focus on the payer accountability as the primary focus, because without the money coming, all of the rest of this will not get, explored and funded and the like. But the next piece, which you've kind of started to get into in this conference, is the provider accountability, because of course, since we've starved the system, we don't have the same kind of experience, because the money has never been in there, to illustrate and demonstrate all the things that we've talked about, and I know you've discussed at this conference, in terms of what the best practices are and making sure that we can demonstrate that on scale. There's never been enough money, there's never been enough wherewithal to take these things to scale in the way that they really should be. So provider accountability needs to be part of this. When Congressman Ramstad, my Republican co-sponsor, and I did parity hearings around the country, people were as outraged about the fact that they could not be sure that their loved one got the right treatment, as much as they were outraged at the fact that obviously the insurance companies never paid for any of the treatment. So, because they did mortgage their homes, by the way, to get this treatment. So, people are going to take care of their families even if the insurance companies don't. We got to work on both. We got to get the payment, but we also got to make sure that there's accountability on the provider side. And we need to help providers understand where those metrics are. So, yes, we're going to leave a lot up to the human interaction and that special, bond that someone has with their therapist. But we're also going to make sure that we employ what we understand that already works out there. So no matter where you live in this country or in this state, you don't get excluded from, kind of the best practices that are acknowledged everywhere else in the country. And that's not a revolutionary concept, but for our field, it is a new concept because we've never been able to actually push that out. Integration is really the key to all of this because our whole medical civil rights law says we've got to make sure health is health. And we don't just say health here and mental health there. And in my book, give it a shameless plug, A Common Struggle, I talk about going to visit my former colleague, Jesse Jackson Jr., when he was at the same clinic that I was in a couple of years earlier, and he wanted to see me. And he was perplexed that, this, mental health wing was on the periphery of the medical campus. In other words, it really was not central to the complex, the medical complex. And how true is that everywhere in our healthcare system, that mental health is the underfunded stepchild of our medical system. So, it was absolutely poignant when one of America's leading civil rights families made the observation, why is mental health treated any differently than the rest of physical health? And I said to Jesse at that moment, I said, you're going to do amazing things for this cause because that insight already is what we need other people to understand in terms of protecting patients from having this second-class status because their illness is an illness of the brain as opposed to any other organ in the body. So part of the story is about the civil rights aspect of this because this really is about people just being treated equally to other physical illnesses and not being discriminated against because of prejudice, because of ignorance, because of misunderstanding. No one understands that behavior is part of the biology of these biological illnesses. And behavior is one of the symptoms of these illnesses. And even if people don't understand that and stigma is rampant, guess what? You can no longer discriminate. It's against the law. So just like with the Civil Rights Act, we never got rid of racism, but we made a big step in saying we're no longer going to sanction racism. We're going to pass the Voting Rights Act to follow the Civil Rights Act. We're going to have the fair housing law and the fair employment law and all of these things. Why? Because there are things that we can do to end discrimination, because that's what this is when people are allowed to have their prejudice play itself out in actual practice. So I am less about anti-stigma movements as I am anti-discrimination movements. That's where I think our field needs to be going in. And that's why I'm so insistent that we get the disclosure and we hold people accountable, rather than them wait for us to wake up for another 5 years and figure out that they've been pocketing all this money because no one's been able to appeal denials, and no one's been able to understand that they're not getting what they're entitled to under the law as they would any other physical illness. And that's what we got to get through to people. They are being discriminated against. And if we get that going, guess what? They'll say, oh my God, Henry Harbin's now looking over our shoulder, and he's analyzing, as only someone with his experience can do, how we're hiding the tally sheet on whether we're treating people equally or not who have a medical disorder of the brain. And they'll say, well, we got to build that out. And by the way, those smart people who gave us all these great solutions in technology, in provision of services, we better start paying for that stuff because it really does work. And so you got to have both the carrot and the stick. The carrot is what you heard here, that there are things that help really improve clinical outcomes. We don't have them really paid for yet, but ideally, insurers are going to say, hey, this really works. Let's spend some more money on this. It's giving us huge value and returns. That's good, but if you combine that with a little bit of pressure from behind, then I think we've got a more optimal situation in order to get people the care and the improved care that I know we all believe they can receive. So I really appreciate what you're doing in this conference because we need to know what our roadmap is. And if we finally have the doors open and we can finally enter into the rest of the house of medicine, and finally the world comes around to what we've always been talking about, and that is brain health is good for overall health, and brain health has a series of other positive effects on the rest of society that have previously been unmeasured, but now can be calculated. So we all know brain health is, we're going to improve education, we're going to reduce criminal justice, we're going to improve the comorbidities, we're going to advance. I mean, it's just going to be like a aha moment. We're all going to say, why did it take so long for us to figure this out? And at that moment, and I think we're going to approach that moment, I think sooner than later, we need to, as a country, be able to have the roadmap. So if you had someone come in and say, I'm ready to fund stuff, say, here's your menu of opportunities. Here are the things that could be employed that will really measurably improve the lives of people. That's what we as a community need to have ready to go. And I think conferences like this really help the thought leaders get that handbook, that guidebook out. So when someone's ready to finally give us the money, we know what we're going to do with it. We're not going to spend more time having to think it through, thanks to what Linda and all of you have done in convening this important conference. So I hope you have a chance to support what we're doing. It's the Kennedy Forum. We created on the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's signing of the Community Mental Health Act, which in spirit was the right bill. When he signed the bill, he said the mentally ill need no longer be alien to our affections or beyond the help of our communities. He had it right. If the president said that sentence today, everyone would say, oh my God, he encapsulated the big challenge we have as a community. One, people with mental illness are alien to our affections. Got it. Pinpointed it. And two, they no longer should be beyond the help of our communities. He didn't say beyond the help of our psychiatric hospitals. He didn't say beyond the help of our psychiatrists. He said beyond the help of our communities. What a notion that this takes a whole community in order to get right. So he had it right, but what ended up happening is the dollars never followed patients into their community to support the very community centers that many of you are active in providing services for. And what ended up happening is people got reinstitutionalized against the whole spirit of his signing that bill into our jails and prisons and homeless shelters. And that is the great shame of our country, is that we have lost the initiative that he had 50 years ago to make sure we treat one another as children of God and that we see each other as brothers and sisters and all part of one family that needs to look after one another. That is the essence of this. And so I appreciate the terrific technology. I appreciate all that you're doing, but understand at the end of the day, you're helping to give dignity to people's lives that they're not getting today because of this two-tiered system that denies them equal access and coverage to real medical services that they deserve and they're yet to be provided. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here, and I look forward to staying afterwards. Thanks so much.